It shouldn't take a global movement and protest to just implement, for example, recommendations from a commission report that's been around for a while.
Right. Hi, welcome to See You Live. My name is Walker Evans. I'm the co-founder of ColumbusUnderground.com. Joining me today is Morgan Harper, lawyer and former congressional candidate. Hi, Morgan. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Cool.
Good to be here.
Wanted to talk with you about the protests, the George Floyd protests going on all over the nation, towns large and small, but here in Columbus specifically. You've been at some of the protests.
Yeah.
What are you seeing, from your perspective while you're there?
It's been a really inspiring time in a lot of ways just to see so many young people out, and it's been a really multiracial group of young people that are out hitting the streets and expressing their views that the system has to change around police brutality and also issues around economic justice and systemic racism. So that's encouraging, and especially for a place like Columbus where we don't necessarily see that level of activism and protest in the streets regularly, that's a really good thing. But there's been a lot of troubling instances in the reaction to those protests from the police, and that's where we really need to, I believe, look at, okay, well, what kind of community do we want to create in the future, and what role do we see for policing there? But overall, having this level of activism is what we need to keep our political system accountable.
Right.
So I'm supportive of that.
I've read, and I can't remember if this is Columbus specific or elsewhere, from some African-American leaders, older leaders who have seen protests, for decades and decades, a variety of causes, who have said that this feels different this time around. Do you think it's because of that multiracial support? Like a lot of people, small white towns in Ohio are holding protests.
Yeah,
is
exactly.
that what the difference is?
I think so. And, I was talking to my stepdad about this earlier this week. And, when they were protesting 60s, 70s, it really felt like you were alone out there and very, very vulnerable. And of course, it's still vulnerable, but there's security that comes in having white people that are willing to stand with you on issues like Black Lives Matter, and that it's happening in smaller towns and in suburbs. I think for Columbus specifically, to see this level of protests in places like New Albany, Upper Arlington, I mean, unheard of from my perspective. So that's really important because the problems are not exclusive to just the city of Columbus. And in fact, once we start broadening the conversation from policing to systemic racism, well, we know for sure that that's happening in all sorts of communities.
Right. Is there anything that you've seen that's really surprised you, for better or worse, while you've been involved?
The immediate reaction from the police those first couple of days when I was out, I think it was a Thursday or so, that first week when the protest started, that was scary. I had been at a protest before, but had never been at one that had that level of reaction from the police and feeling the effects of tear gas, even though I wasn't even directly close to where they were dispersing. And so that was pretty surprising. And that Saturday when we had elected officials who were pepper sprayed, it was so early in the day. So it just all felt like an escalation on the side of law enforcement that wasn't necessary. And that was surprising. The other interesting thing about it is just how long it sustained itself, which the protests themselves and how it's starting to morph. So that's a good level of surprise, but the reaction from the police, I think, was disproportionate and disappointing.
Yeah, and it seemed, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seemed like the first couple of days that aggression from the police was more problematic than it was in kind of the days afterwards. There was like a gradual kind of fall off of that, because even when the curfew went into effect, the police were really heavy-handedly enforcing that and just shooting rubber bullets at people indiscriminately and attacking people left and right. But as soon as they kind of stepped away from taking those kind of aggressive measures, it seemed like everything kind of continued to be peaceful, letting people express themselves. No, but it was interesting scenes to see National Guard guarding alleys and the police and all of that. I think when people were left alone to just express their viewpoints, it was all very manageable. So, questioning why you would need that type of response in the first place, or what was so threatening about people coming together in the first place. Do you feel like it was a security issue, or it was more intimidation on the part of police to be that aggressive, to maybe deter people from even coming downtown?
I think there is a level of trying to deter people for sure.
Yeah.
And then, you know, and that can take many forms. That can take the direct counter reaction and tear gas and all of that. But I also think the attempts of having, you know, the police kneel with protesters, to march with protesters, I think that's also a way of trying to co-opt the message and try to quell people from thinking that any activism is necessary.
Yeah.
And that can be just as problematic.
Right. Well, at the time of recording this, we're about 2 weeks in, I think, to the protests. You said before we started the video that you think these are going to continue to go on longer. What do you think the end goal, the end outcome might be for these protests, or how long do you think they might keep going?
I think they might go on for quite some time, and we're already seeing they're shifting in tone and becoming, you know, a little bit more dispersed, I'd say, in the organizers. It's not necessarily like people who we traditionally see organize protests, but a lot of people, young people especially, that are just saying, I want to do something in my community. So I think that could go on for quite some time and have, you know, a lot of them on the weekends, maybe not happening every single day. But in terms of the outcomes from them, well, one, I think that alone is an important outcome, that we don't just look to traditional organizers or traditional political leaders to be the ones to tell us what to do or bring us together, that we feel comfortable as community members to just organize ourselves and get out messages. I think that's important. But I also think that we need to really look at, well, as we talk about the policy changes that would reform our police department, do we trust the leaders that have already had an opportunity to implement these changes to be the ones to lead this community forward? And I'm hearing a lot of people that are calling for new leadership, you know, potentially considering changes in who is actually at the helm to make these implementations happen, because we're seeing that it shouldn't take a global movement and protest to just implement, for example, recommendations from a commission report that's been around for a while. We should have leaders that feel that urgency every day to address these issues.
So not just making the changes that need to be made, but having long-term accountability and oversight from the community and how to measure the effectiveness of all that.
And that accountability only comes when the community is paying attention and is willing to ultimately vote differently, right? If they don't feel like the promises that were made were actually kept.
Right. Cool. Well, thanks for taking the time to chat with us about this today.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks so much for having me.